Hello, my name's John Tredinnick-Rowe. I'm going to talk to you very briefly for about 20 minutes today about scoping the health and life science sector in Devon from the project that I run under Ray's supervision, which is called Innovation in Healthy Aging. A little bit about how you can adapt scoping reviews to SME mapping and engagement and market analysis. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the most useful lessons I learned from doing this is and what I might recommend to you. I'll try and whiz through it in about 20 minutes. If you have any questions at the end, I'll put my email address up, and if I missed any references or anything, please do get in contact. Hopefully the sound isn't too bad. I'm hoping it's okay, and I'm going to switch between slides. I might pause between them, and that's it really. Let's get going. So, the project itself. So I run a project called Innovation in Healthy Aging Project. This is a collaboration between Devon County Council, South West Academic Health Sciences Network, and West Devon Business Information Point and University of Plymouth naturally, and it's funded by the European Regional Development Fund, just like EPIC is. It has been called a mini EPIC, so it's myself and Ray at the university. I am here until the end of the year scoping out the life science and healthcare sector in Devon. So it is Devon rather than Cornwall focused, and the focus is again a bit broader than EPIC rather than Ehealth and Robotics. It's much more around the healthy aging, and that can be anything from a really clinical genomic perspective, a pharmaceutical or a biotech perspective, up to people who work in domiciliary care homes or healthcare agencies, and the whole kind of spectrum of that idea. Anything that impinges or affects aging or aging-related conditions. So, to take part in this project, the SMEs we work with and social enterprises have to be based in Devon. You have to meet the EU criteria, being an SME, i.e. 250 employees and less than 50 million turnover a year, in euros that is. Yeah, that's it. Similarly, we have a challenge fund. This is £450,000 for ours. It's 40/60 match funded. But we also have a student placement scheme, less than EPIC. So I also arrange student placements for in these SMEs. The students can either work towards the products and services that they fund from the Challenge Fund, or it can be a completely separate student project that still relates to healthy aging but is not built into a application to make a new product or service. Lastly, we also just funnel people towards business advice service. So Business Information Point, one of the partners, if you're not familiar with them, are a state-funded business advice service that give you free courses in marketing, accountancy, basic business skills that you need to set up and run your own enterprise. So if we can't help them and we can't give them a student, we will just push organisations towards the county council and their growth hub schemes, or the business information point people. Lastly, again, similar to EPIC, these people all help focus the challenge fund itself. So when you come up with an idea, we'll work with you to shape it with you, all these different actors, to talk about what can and can't be funded, how it should be funded, what you can and can't do. But today I want to talk to you about how to scope and find these SMEs and social enterprises first. How do you identify them? How do you identify who the ones of those group that you want to work with, etc., and what I've learned from doing it. So, aim and rationale. Well, the objective really for this is that we're developing a search methodology which can be used within the sector that I've described, but adapted to SMEs. So what I'm using is a scoping methodology that's typically used for literature reviews and applying it to companies rather than text. The rationale for this though is it's not just about research. You've also got to think about economic growth, because the council is a partner on this, and we're looking at ecosystems of innovation and clusters of companies within a particular region. ERDF money is focused on regions, Devon in this case, Cornwall in the case of EPIC, and how we can build up the skills and capacities in those regions of the area that you're looking at. So we're developing companies and their skills in the hope they might be able to export them at some point, or sell what they make to other parts of the UK. So it's not just quantitatively mapping out the sector from a market research perspective, but it's also qualitatively thinking about who you want to work with, and not just where they are, and how we can build in really quality outputs of this. So there are some really useful products or services that come to market as a result of this. So that's what your scoping should be doing, and this is relevant really from PhD studentships all the way up to multi-million-pound grants like Epic themselves, that it's not just mapping, it's also screening and thinking about how the best solutions can emerge and be taken forward. Okay, yeah, that's really all I wanted to say. So context and sociological end of this needs to be built in, so almost kind of fitting around a more sociology focused approach to scoping, building in a variety of different things that I'll touch on in a second. Methods. So how did I do this? There's really one key paper that a lot of people would go to for scoping review, and that's the Artsy and O'Malley paper. It's got 5 key elements to it. There's another one by Thomas that I think is useful, but you're really, as I just said, building in additional methodologies to a traditional literature approach and adapting it to finding companies from databases. So these 5 approaches are: identify the research question, talked about that already, must be in Devon, must be in SME, etc., etc. Relevant case studies, so then you use those criteria to go out and filter for case studies themselves. The study selection involves basically how do you go out and map those companies and organisations, and I will tell you about the resources I used to do that and the approaches I took and the ones that are most effective shortly. Charting the data, this is important because depending who you're working with and where you are, in effect you're going to have a discussion with yourself about if you want to tabulate the data. Do you want a mapped output? So I've used heat maps, which I'll show you later. Do you want graphical output? Are you doing social network analysis? Do you want more of a sociogram to be the product of this? So Seb will be talking about that today as well. Lastly, how are you going to pull these disparate sets of data into a usable form? So the last step is collating, summarising, and generally synthesising what you've done. That's a point as well. You've got to think about, because how do you go from heat maps to text to interviews that you may have done and pull it together in one useful resource? There's the reference as well. I put in International Journal of Sociological Research Methods, which I've hidden behind my face. It's a useful paper. If you just put Artsy and O'Malley 2005 in scoping studies, you'll probably find it. Or talk to Ray, he's done plenty of these things too. So methods themselves, I also wanted to talk about that you can build in things like discussions, because I'm not technically doing research, but you will have research ethics approval to record interviews. You can have all the kind of structured, semi-structured discussions that you've had with companies and SMEs built into this, into these results, and then used in a useful way. So that can be anything from when I ring up a company to talk to them about the project and what we're doing and entice them into being involved in it, thinking about what they tell me about their struggles with innovation and the challenges and opportunities they face. Equally, you may want to think about building in some kind of Delphi model where you've got expert interviews to talk about what the challenges are for your sector or who to talk to, and that can be built into all kinds of networking activities. For example, I've go to quite a lot of different networking events, and you will meet a variety of different people there, companies, organisations, what you might call gateholders really for getting into these networks too, which is really useful. A useful way to meet new SMEs and add them to your list, and you'll end up with a big spreadsheet of organisations, where they are, who they are, address, email, phone, contact point, also the categories that you've broken them down into, and network activities can be part of this scoping method. They've got lots of resources that I'll talk to you again in who I talked to and was involved in these types of activities. So don't just think about it as text and adapting a literature review. You can build in all kinds of other additional sociological and almost business focused activities into scoping. So identifying relevant studies. So who did I talk to? Local government, really useful. So I work with the county council as part of the project. So they're great. They have their own resources of SMEs, businesses, but we also need to think about sub-units. So like Devon County Council. Also, you want to go further down, Plymouth City Council, Torbay Unitary Council if you're in Cornwall. And so, for example, in Cornwall, because it's got a unitary authority, you want to think about town councils, parish councils, and these can be relevant. If you're working in community mental health, some of the key stakeholders and actors in your network may be within those parish level organisations, community focused organisations. Equally, there's a one in Devon that's called Dementia Friendly Parishes of the Yelm Estuary, who are centrally involved in administering a lot of the dementia services for that area. So those are the kind of people down at those levels that may be useful for you for mapping out what you're doing, depending on where you are and who you're talking to. So don't go dismiss it just 'cause sometimes it's small, unless you're time pressured, and then you may want to. Okay, so Companies House, you may not know what Companies House is. Companies House is where you have to report your tax statements, and that becomes a public record. So online, if you put in the name of any company, or typically companies are probably most relevant, you'll be able to pull up all of their tax filing history, when they filed it, was it on time, when it was filed, the company's registered address, and also something called a SIC code, Standard Industrial Code, and tells you what sector they're in. So this is really useful for several reasons. One, it helps you find everyone that's registered from tax status. It gives you an address of them, and it also tells you qualitatively, like, are they regularly filing money, how much money are they turning over, and that gives you an idea if you want to work with them or not. Do they fit your SME criteria, if that's what you're using, etc., etc. So it's quite a good screen, really. Yeah, I recommend that. You can delve into it depending on what type of analysis you're doing. Anything economic, they've got a lot of data you can use, and it's publicly available resources. Equally, so formation zones and startup centres and universities, helpful for getting in contact with companies, people who are just beginning their journey. Startups, if you read the literature, are the lifeblood of innovation. So people in the formation zone in Plymouth and what's called the career zone in Exeter can be useful to talk to. Gabriel might be a good starting point for this, given that I think he lives with a chap who works in the formation zone as well. Science parks, nearly everywhere will have science parks in this country. What I should warn you about in my lessons from this is you must have a way into these organisations. A lot of the companies in these science parks are very busy. You may discover if you email, ring, cold call, approach them, you won't get anywhere. You need to know the director of operations or someone in the senior management who can introduce you to individual companies, or more usefully get you in a newsletter, or go to them on your behalf and say, hey, look, there's this money in this project, maybe it'd be useful for you. But you won't, unless you already have the contacts. I'd say you're knocking on a door that won't open otherwise. Okay. Next one is probably the most useful of anything, I'd say, is the Academic Health Sciences Network. They are part of my project. I believe they're part of EPIC as well. If you can get in contact with these guys and build them into your applications, or if you have anyone who knows them, these people have probably the best repositories of information that are most complete and readily usable. I'll talk about this a bit more later on, but if you had just one to pick out of this list, the most time-effective, useful thing to do is go to Southwest AHSN. They'll give you a whole raft of contacts to go from, and people to work with, not just in scope, but they'll be able to tell you who they've worked with successfully in the past, who to spend your time with and who not necessarily to. But equally, there's other AHSNs around the country who write reports and might have useful information for you, so they're worth digging into some of their other information. So you might also want to consider who's won awards in your sector. So NHS Digital Awards were quite useful for me. They told me who's doing well, who's performing at a high level. Might want to go and approach those companies. If there's any other body in your organisational sector that does award things, you might want to look at who's won. Equally, our own institution in Plymouth has business development coordinators who have large repositories of information of people that they've worked with that may not be in your sector necessarily, but they're always worth going and talking to. They've got CRM files and other things that might be exportable to you, or just to chat to, that might point you in the right direction. Equally, outside of your institution, I had some really useful chats with people in Marjohns, University of St Mark and St John. Their enterprise manager is very good, she's very friendly. They have more of a social enterprise focus at that institution, but she put me in contact with a whole load of different networks that opened up contacts for me. So if you have contacts in other institutions, reach out to them. Equally, other projects, so not just institutions, but people like, obviously EPIC is separate from what I'm doing. There's another project in Cornwall called Smartline, and another one called Transform Aging, who's funded by the National Lottery. It's part of the Design Council. Very useful project. I recommend you talk to these people too. If you can establish a good working relationship, it really helps. Some of the ladies from Transform Aging came and talked at our conference. If they find people that don't meet their remit, they send them over to us, and vice versa. So it's good to set up these kind of institutional networks between projects. Lastly, there's a ton of business networks that you'll be able to tap into. Chamber of Commerce, very useful. Both there's a Devon level one, but there's also Chamber of Commerce in Tavistock, in Oakhampton, in Exeter, subunits you can tap into and present. They're always looking for people to present. You can go and stand in front of an audience of businesses and tell them what you're doing, and it's really useful. I got in their newsletters, for example, very helpful. But you also want to consider Small Business Federation, and academic conferences and general networking events. All of these things you can tap into. I wouldn't say I've got a lot of, and I can't this a minute, contacts out of them, physical SMEs in my mapping, but it might lead to further things down the line. It's always good for you if you're doing PhD to learn to present in front of these audiences. You meet people, you learn new opportunities, and you'll get to ingratiate yourself into these particular networks. So lastly, what else worked for me? I found it was useful to use search engine optimization. So if you make a Twitter account for yourself or your page, I preliminarily scanned out to 350 businesses, found all of them on Twitter that I could, and then I used the automated search engine optimization in Twitter that suggests to you other companies, organizations that you might like to identify things, and that was really helpful. So same with Facebook or LinkedIn, you can use the AI or software on these platforms to generate solutions for yourself. As another way to find the odd organization you may not have got to. Company's House I talked about. There may be a regulator for what you're doing. So voluntary or statutory. There's a voluntary sort of quality assurance checkmark organisation that works for community interest companies, and these people were great for me because they're actually based in Plymouth. So you get a nice little yellow tick at the bottom of your web page to say you're quality assured by this organisation. You apply your business to a set of organisational ethical standards. These people have large lists of companies, and I approached the CIC voluntary regulator in Plymouth and said, these are the people I want to work with, would you be able to forward information to them? And they did, and they even CC'd me into all the emails that they sent out. So I got in contact with 20-30 community interest companies just off the back of one email approaching this voluntary regulator. So these people are worth talking to if you can spend 10 minutes to make a nicely worded email to them, or if you know them already. KTPs and people in higher education institutes, I've said about that already. I've talked to you about purposive sampling. This is more of a existing sampling methodology that has literature based onto it that you can use. Lastly, posting. Posting is a relatively small but useful way to send out information. Don't just think everything that you need to know is online. It's worth posting people, especially if you've got a free resource that you can send out from your department. As long as you're not sending out hundreds and hundreds of mails, they probably won't mind. It may yield some results for you. You never know. If it's not too time consuming, it's worth thinking. And if you get returned envelopes saying this business doesn't exist anymore, you can cross them off your database. So what is purposive sampling? If you know about this already, good. If not, it's a set of qualitative research methods. I put this deliberately because you can find citations for this if you're writing, of different ways to look for people to work with. Typically this is designed for literature, but it applies to company acquisition as well. You can look for criterion, for example, set out particular criteria that you want to look for and search for them. You can just snowball. This is the same thing as citation chasing. You talk to people, you say who's good to work with, anyone in the sector, with any networks, etc. And you just follow up your contacts. Sometimes it's just convenient, sometimes you don't have a lot of time and you're limited to resources, and it's just about ease of access. So you go to the people who you want to work with. Like I said, if you've got limited time, go to the Academic Health Sciences Network people first. That would be a convenient sampling methodology. Or just opportunistic. Go to an event, see who you talk to, just go and try and put yourself amongst people and see how far you get with it. There's more to it than that, obviously, but if you're writing a PhD or other papers, there's a variety of different methods based on sampling and purposive sampling techniques that you can invoke to try and use in different contexts. You can use one or more or all of these. So I tried to lay out systematically what I did in some kind of flowchart so it looks like a systematic review. You can see at the top box there is a whole list of different organisations that I work with that map back to the categories I gave earlier. You can see if you look at the box in the middle-ish that says AHSN, it's got 1,012 organisations or SMEs that I found from their list. And then if you look at something smaller, like at the bottom, business networks, I only got 3 really, probably about 5 now if I updated it, but it's in that area. So you can see the effectiveness of different areas to go to. Company's House, 250, also quite useful. So that produced about 1,400 raw data points in my Excel sheet of the companies that I've mapped, and then I had to remove all the duplicates because of course these different databases you pull information out don't necessarily map to each other, and then I had to exclude people who weren't SMEs, not in Devon, who were maybe doing things with youth organisations and not something related to healthy ageing, and that left me with actually 252, needs to be adjusted now, organisations to work with, and that was how my sampling technique mapped out for me, really. Well, you end up with a big Excel sheet with all this information in and categories too. So charting the data. So when you put categories into your data, that allows you to do various things. It allows you to do sub-analysis. So for example, I used heat maps, you might use tabulations in different forms, sociograms, but if you put different categories in, well that be, so Ray and I came up with the people basically on a 1 to 6 scale most likely to be applicable to the project, people you could encourage to come into the project, people impinging on the sector, etc, etc. And equally you might want to make a list, so this organisation is in orthopaedics, this organisation is a domiciliary care home, this organisation fits into a chiropractor remit. So you can break down and make maps, or you can make tabulations or sectorize where people are. I'll go through this quickly just so you can see it, but if you build in those categorizations into your big master spreadsheet of scoping, you can get some interesting displays of data. Because I'm working with the council to produce reports, I'm just used it in a nice, simple, easy visual heat map format. So you can see essentially what I've done, but you can make it as complicated as you want as long as you've built in all the appropriate categories into your master spreadsheet of information. So this is really the 852 mapped across Devon. You can see the different heat clusters around Plymouth, Torbay, a little bit around Exeter, and a little bit hiding around Barnstable. I'll put the numbers up in a second. So there you go, those are the numbers as they fall. Hopefully this is big enough for you to see. Again, bit around Barnstable, you can see a big 62, 42 clustered around Plymouth. There's whole hubs going around the south coast up towards Devon. Big gaps as you might expect across all the moors. So if we break this down into subclusters, we've got just the clinical companies, again a hub around Plymouth as you might expect. The urban conurbations did quite naturally fit to some of these patterns, but other things surprised you a little. I'll just scoot through these quickly. Domiciliary care, again you can see the chain on the south coast. Plymouth is a bit diminished, there's a greater red spot on the heat map right down there. Not a lot in Barnstable, a little bit more in Bideford however. Homecare Agencies, you go back to Plymouth now, and actually a lot of them, because they're registered in Plymouth, are not actually domiciliary care organisations, they're the agency. You can go back to having a hub in Plymouth. So as you can see, there's a large amount of activity up around the north coast around Barnstable for this too. Podiatry, no particular surprise, a large coastal cluster down by Torquay. Pharmacy, you might notice Barnstable again is lit up, and a little bit in Clumpton, but nothing on the south coast. So pharmaceutical companies, again you can see, don't map at all to the other wider spread. So I won't go through too much more really, other than to say you're going to have to think about how you're going to collate all these different bits of information, deciding if you wanted to tabulate it, if you use heat maps, graphics, textual, literature reviews, what you're going to do. Think about meaningfully how you're going to integrate these sources of information to display it in your work. Depends what you're doing. So I'm reporting this partly for the council, so they'll have their own needs. Academic journals will have their own needs. PhD thesis will have things you have to work to too. It's just to be something to bear in mind, the reporting standards you need to meet. So lastly, what can we conclude from this? Really, I would say first, industrial partnerships are becoming increasingly important, no matter if you're a PhD student or running a multi-million-pound project. You need to think about these things and how you can have SME business integration and crossover, so it's not going away really, especially when you think about industrial strategy. That's quite important at the minute. You will not escape this. It might be useful to pick up some of the skills. Equally, scoping gives you a repository of data to work from after you've done it. So I'll end up with a nice big spreadsheet, lots of information about the sector, and as it actually has come up now, there's more funding for ERDF projects to look at the capitalisation and commercialisation of what you've done. So now we can go and explore other funding opportunities based on what you've done. So if you've built in your systems properly, you've got a nice clean data set that you've worked on. Great, you can build in other opportunities, postdoc, other projects afterwards if you're thinking about those things. This methodology is quite good because the scoping review can be adapted to one, SME market analysis, two, you can build in social science things. It's quite flexible. We can build in networking, interviews, semi-structured or otherwise discussions to fit it around your needs really. And lastly, because I said I'd make the point, I retrofitted the data I had on raised recommendations to see how much of it came from which sources. So if you only had a little bit of time, I found that 75% plus of my data all came out of the Academic Health Sciences Network reports. 250, like I said, came out of the company's house, but there's a little bit from the government bioscience reports and talking to your organisation. But if you had one resource to go for, when you refit the data that was useful in the final 852 I got, 3/4 plus of that came from the Academic Health Sciences Network. So go there if anything. That's it really. If you have any questions, great, there's my email address. Please ping me, I'll send you any more resources. Happy to talk to anyone at any point. And that's it, just one more slide. And yeah, here are the funders. So thank you, Devon County Council. We are a European Regional Development funded project. Thank you to AHSN, who are very useful to go to, and BIP. And great, I hope I didn't run over and that you have a really fun rest of the day and enjoy your time. And yeah, thank you everyone, I'm sorry I couldn't be with you.